Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Roughly Chinese. Today, I'm with two honorable guests, Radhika and Carl. Radhika and Carl, it's such an honor to be with the both of you today. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself shortly and letting the audience know exactly what you do and why you care about China.
Gosh, that's a long. Should I talk for half an hour or something?
Sure, you're welcome.
No, very quickly and briefly, I'm Radhika Desai. I'm a professor at the Department of Political Studies at the University of Manitoba. I'm also a visiting professor at the Department of International Development at the London School of Economics. A couple of other things that you should know about me is that I convene the International Manifesto Group, which is an international discussion group, and we hold a couple of webinars every month on important issues. So last we did one on the elections in Venezuela. We've done one on, we are going to do one very soon on the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. And earlier we did absolutely one of our most successful ones was earlier this year when we did one on DeepSeek and what it meant. So I do that. I also do a fortnightly show called Geopolitical Economy Hour, which you'll find on YouTube. And why do I care about China? Well, I care about China because I think that capitalism is failing and socialism is working. And I think that this contrast is already determining the fate of the world. It's sending the West into conniptions and orgies of violence and aggression. Meanwhile, it seems as though of all the places in the world, China, and to some extent also Russia, but certainly China, is emerging as a kind of the stable center of this otherwise very turbulent world. And I think that it's the way forward. So that's why I care about China. And of course, I should say one other thing, perhaps. One more thing.
Please.
Most people, and in fact, I've taught lots of Chinese students, and they say, oh, you say China is very developed and so on, but look, we have still so many problems. And I said, just hang on a second. How about you compare China, not to the United States, which they are habituated to doing, but compare it to India. When China had its revolution, when India became independent, they were both roughly comparable countries, very large countries, populous countries. And in fact, in the late 40s, India was marginally better off, actually, according to the GDP statistics then available. It was marginally better off than China, believe it or not. Today, look at the two countries. They could not be further apart. So coming from India in particular, I have a very sharp sense of what has been achieved over the last, 3/4 of a century.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I could listen to you talk for 30 minutes about yourself.
Okay.
Honestly, very impressive. And I really love what you said about China. We'll definitely get into that more. Carl, if you would like to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Carl Zha. I'm a ship poster online. I love China because I was born in China. I was born and raised in China. I grew up in China in the decade of 1980s, and I have a very happy childhood. And when I came to United States, everything I read about China is about a bizarro world that never existed. It does not match my lived experience growing up in China. This is why I felt the need to speak up, to share with people what China is really like, what I know about China. So that's what I do. I'm kidding about. I'm only half kidding about being a shit poster online, but right now I try to share my experiences on Twitter, on YouTube, on social media to give people a Chinese perspective on China's development.
Yes, and we definitely need a Chinese perspective. And I just want to shout out Carl's podcast, Silk and Steel. It's really amazing. And I think you post so frequently and you really let people into that insight, which I think maybe like a few years ago, people had no idea at all. So I'm just such a fan of the both of you. And if you're ready, we're going to get into the first topic. This is kind of a timely topic that has been happening because I used to live in New York. I lived there for 8 years, and recently they elected a new mayor, Zohran Mamdani. And there's all this interest now in talk about socialism in America, in New York City. And if I was in New York, I would have fully supported Zohran if I could vote, but I can't. And I really do like some of the things that he was talking about. On top of that, Chinese people actually started to pay attention to him, you know? I mean, first of all, they said he's very handsome. But more than anything, they said that they really liked what he was saying, you know? They felt like it was a step in the right direction. But at the same time, some Chinese people were maybe a little bit skeptical as well, or disappointed or unsure. So there's been quite a mixed reaction, but Zoran has gotten a very big kind of warm reception in China. People are really talking about it, and it's not just like, oh, that's America's problem. You know, it's kind of like, how will this impact America? And I think socialism as a whole in the world. So maybe let's start with you, Radhika. What are your general feelings about Zoran's election victory?
Well, I think that it comes at a very critical time in the history of the Democratic Party, the recent election in which they lost so badly. Have sent them into a tailspin of decline. And I think that essentially it marks the end of an era when the Democrats were able to win elections essentially through a fundamentally duplicitous strategy, a fundamentally dishonest strategy in which they got the votes of ordinary Americans, of working people, but in fact they served the interests of the rich and the powerful, the big corporations and so on. And somehow, as long as things were going well, they managed to ride the two horses, which were kind of diverging already, but they managed to ride those two horses simultaneously. And it kind of worked. But I think as of the middle of the 2010s, when Trump first got elected, this strategy is no longer working. I think Trump figured out that you can no longer win elections by telling people that their economy is doing very well. He figured that out. But of course, he serves the same corporate capitalist class. So he then matched that with a lie about, how their economy was not doing well. He understood that they were suffering, something needed to be done, America had to be made great again, and so on. So he went on all this, but then he did not tell them the real reason why they were doing so badly, which is that for the last almost 5 decades, they have been pursuing neoliberal policies, and that this is what has deindustrialized America, taken away their good jobs, everything, increased inequality so obscenely, one could go on. And so they said, he didn't say that. Obviously, he can't because he's going to continue the same policies. So he said, you are suffering because of China and trade and because of immigrants.
Right.
So what do we see now? He's making a big show of tariffs, which are on again, off again, but he has to look like he's addressing the concerns. And of course, he's terrorizing immigrants. So, the significance of the victory of Zoran is Mamdani. Is that he has won by essentially giving the alternative story. It's neoliberal policies that are bad. We need to replace them with socialist policies. And he's also managed to be rather Teflon on this whole anti-Semitism thing, because it would be very easy to characterize his support for Palestine as anti-Semitic, which is basically what has been successfully done to practically every left-wing politician in the West. So I would say that for all these reasons, I think it's great. Obviously, I think that the democratic establishment will come out and try to defend the old way, but I don't think they will succeed. The real question is how many others will take the message, how many others will build that new type of politics, and of course, what they will do on foreign policy. But we will see about that. Right. Because on foreign policy, there has been this old tradition within so-called social democracy, what I call the guns and butter agreement. That is to say that we will agree with your imperialist foreign policy provided you give us a few reforms at home, welfare reforms at home. So we will agree with your guns so long as you give us a bit of butter. So the question is whether he will, obviously his support for Palestine is an important precedent or important marker. Let's hope that people like him, and if there is going to be a new reconstruction of left of center politics in the United States, that this is also taken on board.
Exactly. And I think actually Zoran's avid support for Palestine is actually what won over a lot of the votes of the socialists in New York, and the communists of New York, because that is a bold move to make, especially within the Democratic Party, because like you said, it's been such a dubious election where they have promised this and promised that in the last election, but then at the same time, we're bombing Palestine the entire time, which is, I think, a big reason why they lost so terribly. But I think you actually nailed it with the Chinese perspective, I think you and the Chinese netizens actually share very common ground, where the Chinese public is also saying, similar to you, maybe he is aligning, or I don't know, maybe he could be coerced into aligning with an imperialist agenda while providing welfare, while, essentially buying the hearts of people and saying, you can have cheaper groceries, but we'll continue to, do the foul stuff overseas, right? So we'll see. I think that's a great way to put it. Carl, what about you? What are your thoughts about Zoran's recent election win? And you also used to live in the States, right? So what do you think about this as a whole?
Well, I think it's significant because Zoran is obviously not a candidate of the Democratic Party machine. He was not the designated candidate for the DNC. That would be Andrew Cuomo's. And him is really a popular candidate, voted from the bottom up. And I think it's also important to point out his opponents, the opponents of Zoran, both on the left and the right, they essentially made the Democratic primary for mayor of New York into a referendum on the issue of Israel and Palestine with a smear of anti-Semitism charges. So Zoran's win is especially significant because this is New York City, the most Jewish city of the United States. And the tide has shifted. The tide has significantly shifted in the past year and a half. And now majority of the Americans, especially among the young, who are the major backer of Zoran, are now turned decisively against Israel and what they see as genocide committed on Palestinians. So I think all these anti-Semitism charges actually backfired. It made people realize, okay, we will prefer a candidate who take a strong stand, an ethical stand on the Israel-Palestinian issue. And here we have a young, charismatic, likable candidate, yet the Democratic Party machine is really trying to put him at arm's distance because they do not want someone like that. This is the reason Democrats have been losing elections in the past election cycles, because they don't give people the popular candidates that people actually want. This is what they did to Bernie Sanders back in 2016. This is how Trump won in the first place. And I remember that campaign. I was in the United States. I'm a citizen, and I remember that 2016 campaign really turned a lot of people, young people, onto the path of socialism, because they saw the old Democratic Party machine is so corrupt. That's a radicalizing moment for a lot of young people when they basically totally screwed over Bernie Sanders, trying to shoehorn Hillary into the candidacy. And the Democratic Party hasn't learned their lessons. They put out Biden, and lately they put out Kamala. All these candidates that does not appeal to American voters, especially the young people. So Zoran is a welcoming change, I would say.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I do really feel like this is a really pivotal shifting moment, right? That is happening in the States that is essential and necessary, and following all the stuff with Trump and the ICE raids and all of these different events that have literally been happening for what, 4 months, 5 months only? I think so much is being burst open. Carl, I wanted to follow up that question with you by asking you about, like you mentioned before, Americans now have a growing interest in socialism. So I want to ask you how you felt about that, what you think that idea of socialism is, and this goes for both of you, and how does that lead people to China? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think this is a reflection of the deteriorating conditions of American working class. Back during the Cold War, when there was intense ideological rivalry between United States and the Soviet Union, the U.S. ruling class had to make a lot of concessions to the working class in order to win their support. And this is why there was a lot of social welfare program that was implemented. And after the Cold War ended, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, now suddenly the ruling class of the United States feel they no longer need to share the spoils with the working class inside United States. This is why we have been seeing a growing inequality in the U.S. Now, if you look at the Gini coefficient, now we're back to the level of 1920s, before the Great Depression, to back to like the robber baron days of the United States. With all the wealth from globalization now is accrued to the top 1% and leaving the scrap for the 99%. This is what led to disillusionment of the capitalist system in United States. And this is why people are seeking alternatives. And this is a very critical juncture because in a time of economic decline and diminishing economic prospect, people usually, either turn left or they turn right. It's your socialism or barbarism, socialism or fascism. And so right now, I think it's heartening to see at least significant people, especially young people, are expressing interest in socialism.
Absolutely. Radhika, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that Carl said, and I would add a couple of other things. So the first thing is that, you say, what will this socialism look like? So, I mean, obviously, we will have to see whether, it takes the usual form of, we'll accept the imperialist policies. And I think there are good reasons to believe that this will not be quite so successful, that sort of, imperial guns and butter sort of agreement, because American imperialism is also failing. Its capitalism is failing. Its imperialism is also failing. I mean, one of the reasons why you got the end of this war against Iran is not because the Americans had managed to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, but because they could not. And it was clear that they could not. And so what's the point? I mean, they're not capable of doing much more than that. So that's why we got the ceasefire. Similarly, recently in the confrontation between India and Pakistan, the superiority of Chinese weapons that were supplied to Pakistan over the Indian military's performance was manifest to everybody. And even in India, where they've been trying to cover it up, slowly things are leaking out and the government is ending up looking really bad. So imperialism is also not working. So I think there's hope for that. I would say one other thing, which is that, it's about time. I mean, I feel that for a while, first of all, over the last 4.5 decades, when neoliberalism has been applied in the United States, as in most Western countries, and I would say it's more than just the end of the Soviet Union. I mean, basically, the Reagan era is the beginning, and the Soviet Union still existed at that time. But whatever. I mean, the inequality has been increasing. But throughout all this time, this should have been the moment for the left. Socialism should have been strong. Because they should have opposed neoliberalism. Because neoliberalism is essentially not, it's not about markets and competition, which is what they say it's about. It's really about advancing the interests of the biggest corporations. It's about financialization and so on. And the left should have strengthened itself and should have attacked all this. But instead, left essentially, the Democratic Party, the left of center forces, were essentially accepted the neoliberal settlement. And they had created their own sort of specific type of policies around that. And so what you've got is a rising tide of discontents, people who are not happy, but who until now has mobilized them? The right, Trump, Brexit, the alliance, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, other right-wing forces all over Europe and the West more generally. So now we hear that in Britain, for example, Jeremy Corbyn and Zahra Sultana have creating a new party. We have yet to hear more about it, but all of these are good portents. The real question is, how far will they go? And now, are we in a position to wrest those sections of the working class that had gone along with Trump, bring them back? There's a better alternative. And the portents for that are good because Trump, with his big, beautiful bill and all these ridiculous tariff measures, I think working people are recognizing that they, there's a very American expression, they bought a pig in a poke. A poke is a bag. So they bought a pig in a bag. They didn't know what it was like. So now they're discovering, now that the pig is coming out of the poke, they are discovering what it's really looking like. So I would say that the circumstances are good.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I want to go back to something that you said that really struck a chord. But I think, like you said, there have been plenty of opportunities for the left to get organized because I think people do or the Western left focuses a lot on anti-capitalism, but there hasn't been enough focus on anti-imperialism, right? Which go hand in hand. And what is happening in Palestine, the genocide in Palestine, shows the left right now urgently that enough is enough. Imperialism is a huge problem and needs to end, which is in hand with the end of capitalism. So I really like what both of you said, and aligning that contextual history is very important because, of course, people in the West are not taught that, right? And maybe don't understand, like you said, Carl, that social welfare was in the States was actually a reaction to the Cold War, right? Against the Soviet Union, which is so funny because, of course, everyone is taught to villainize the Soviet Union and villainize communism. So myself, seeing the way that the whole conversation around socialism and communism is shifting so much has been so surprising, so enlightening, so wonderful. And of course, there needs to be a lot of conversations and debates about it as well. It's very necessary. So then, which moves me to my next question. How do you think people searching for this alternative, this necessary alternative in socialism, how does that lead people to China? Because China is a socialist alternative, but there's so much doubt about it, right? Like, my next question is all about how, as I spent so much time in the States, so many conversations within the left, even in attempts to get organized, there was so much friction about China. Oh no, China's not socialist, or China's too communist, blah, blah, blah. Like we said, very, very contradicting sides. So, Carl, maybe we can start with you. How do you think this desperate need for an alternative to imperialism and capitalism lead people to China? And in your own social environment and experiences in community and organizations, how do you think people have come around to China, if at all, or maybe not,
Well, I mean, China is the world's largest socialist country, and it's a country where socialism has been actually successfully implemented, right? Right now, a lot of the anti-communist, anti-socialist talk in United States is they say, oh, socialism sounds great in practice, but it doesn't work, right? But they don't want you to look at China. If you bring example of China, they're like, no, 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 China is not socialist. China is capitalist. But this is a result of decade-long Cold War propaganda. A lot of Americans that don't realize the American society has been the most heavily propagandized society in the world. Right. And, U.S. invented marketing. Marketing. U.S. is great at marketing. There's only a thin line between marketing and propaganda, and U.S. excel at propaganda. The difference is, they say, oh, there's propaganda everywhere. I would say people in the West are probably least aware of the fact that they have been propagandized. Now people are waking up actually because people there's the credibility of mainstream legacy media is all-time low. This is because they can see that the system has been dysfunctional all around them. It's hard to for those lies to be sustained anymore. But yet at the same time, because there's a profound ignorance about China, they just don't know any real context about China. So yet all their information, most of the information they're getting from China is from those polluted sources, either mainstream legacy media or those NED funded, quote unquote alternative media sources. That's probably run by like a Falun Gong called media channel or something. And so people need to, this is why I encourage people just to travel. When let your lying eyes convince you the reality is different. Just travel to China and experience it. This is where a lot of people actually experience their awakening. They realize they have been lied to all their life about what China really is. And this is a lot of this talk about, okay, China is not socialist, China is actually capitalist, or China is communist, but it's bad. This is all mostly result of propaganda. And this is why we're here, right? We're here to fight those Cold War era propagandas. Hopefully we're having an effect.
Totally. I really, really love every point that you made. I mean, one, for people to come to China and see it for themselves, because I, as someone who has recently moved to China, I always believed it, but seeing for it made a very profound impact on me, right? And it's in everyday small things. It's in being able to afford basic needs, but it's also in seeing the public infrastructure everywhere, seeing how convenient it is for people to do everyday things in their lives. And also the culture of leisure that I've never experienced anywhere else. Like, my favorite thing to see in China is the aunties and uncles dancing in the park. I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but it's my favorite thing. And I think it speaks wonders to how retirees are treated, to how retirees get to enjoy their lives and be in extremely social and fun and exciting environments where they can continue to be invigorated and exercise and be healthy. Whereas as I spent time in the States, where are the elders? How are they being treated? It's little things like this that even if a person does not know too much about socialism or doesn't know the theory or Marxism, they can still come to China and see that life is significantly better and it is under a socialist system, right? So, yeah, Radhika, what are your thoughts about that question?
Yeah, so again, both of you have raised so many really good points. But let me also say, you're right. At one level, it doesn't matter what the theory is, this is working. And it's manifestly clear if you visit here that it's working. But I think it is really helpful to take a look back, at least at history, if not theory. Essentially, if you think about it, most of the Western left, they imagine that Russia was not really communist or whatever, socialist. China is not socialist today because socialism can only really happen after capitalism has finished developing an economy so completely, and then you will have socialism, and it will first occur in the advanced capitalist countries, not in these backward countries and so on. And unfortunately, this is not true, and it's not even a correct rendition of what people like Marx and Engels, the founders of modern socialism, actually said. But this is what has become accepted truth for a number of different reasons. But I think the main reason is that after the First World War, which was this great cataclysm caused by capitalism and imperialism and all that. Essentially, there should have been revolution in the West, but it was co-opted. It was suppressed. Of course, you got the rise of fascism in this period as well. And meanwhile, capitalism's ability to offer anything remotely like development to the rest of the world, it was not there. What all capitalism could offer the rest of the world is subordination and lack of development. So you naturally had the eruption of socialisms that were also about developing their economy. So China, of course, had to develop, very rapidly its economy. People forget that, by the 1930s, the rapid development of the Soviet Union had made the Soviet Union the second largest industrial power in the world after the United States. That was also another astonishing achievement. And if you consider the fact that first world countries, the rich countries of today, the Western capitalist countries, they all developed on the back of imperialism by exploiting other parts of the world. So today, the Soviet Union then, or China today, everything they have achieved in a situation that was unique in three different ways. Number one, they had to do it without the luxury of imperialism. They didn't have these vast other territories that they could plunder and exploit in order to aid their own development. Number two, they had to do it in the teeth of imperialist resistance. Imperialist countries resisted them all along. The West launched a war against the Soviet Union. The West is today hindering for 2 decades. They didn't even recognize China, etc. So, we can go through all that. And even today, it's continuing its war against China. And thirdly, in the teeth of imperialist resistance, and it had to anyway, there's a third point. He'll come back to me. But these are completely different circumstances in which these countries have achieved a lot. Yes, it's true that beginning in 1978, China liberalized its system. That's why it's called socialism with Chinese characteristics. And by the way, China doesn't say it is socialist, it is building socialism. And it is keeping to a socialist path in building socialism. That's exactly what it's doing. And starting in 1978, it did liberalize its economy. Yes, it's true that there are many big capitalists and many big corporations in China. It's true that they are very influential. But the key difference is that in China, the party state, the government, controls capital.
Yes.
In the West, capital controls the government.
Yes.
And this is the key difference. It's not about markets. Markets have been there in feudalism. They will be there in socialism to some extent. The question is how they are regulated, how they are governed. And of course, in a time when technology more or less requires that you have very large corporations, you organize production on a very grand scale, it's inevitable that you will have big corporations. The question is, are they regulated? In whose interests are they working? Et cetera, et cetera. So for all of these reasons, I would say that one other thing, the idea that the whole world has to wait until capitalism develops the world, that idea has to go out of the window. Capitalism isn't even able to keep the Western world at the level of development they had achieved. These countries are deindustrializing. So there is no way that capitalism offers a way out. For a long time, I feel that many leftists, including many Marxists, have adhered not to a Marxist conception of capitalism, that capitalism will eventually fail, Marx said. They have adhered to a Schumpeterian conception of capitalism, in which capitalism is constantly developing, innovating, etc. It stopped doing that a long time ago. So
these are such crucial distinctions and crucial contextual history that I think people are still learning to this day. And I really love what you said about China building socialism. That's also extremely important. And the distinction of China and how the state controls the capital. That is something that the world desperately needs, the U.S. desperately needs, but is quite the opposite at the moment. So I guess I wanted to ask you both, in experiencing the building of socialism, as you spent time in China, Carl, I wanted to ask you, as a child, growing up in China, being in China, I love hearing your stories about how you were born here, you grew up here, and you said that you had a really wonderful youth. I'd love to hear more about that, about how you witnessed the building of socialism just through a very personal lens as you were growing up.
Well, I mean, we can just compare the healthcare system between China and United States, because we all know the American healthcare system is seriously broken. When I was about 11 or 12, I contracted hepatitis A and I was hospitalized. I had to stay in the hospital for I think a month, and all that was done and paid for by the state, because I was staying with my grandma, because my grandma was work as a school teacher, and the factory to which her school teacher attached had its own hospital system. So, and they offered healthcare to all the families of the factory workers. I stayed in the hospital for a month at no charge, and that's unthinkable in U.S. today. And look, a lot of the propaganda against China is actually serve to convince you not to look to China as a model, as a viable model, because people will say, "Oh, China is just as bad. China is just like another imperialist country, or China is just as bad as United States." It couldn't be further from the truth. Like Radhika has said, capital do not control. There hasn't been a taking over of the state by the capital. And in China, the party is very much in control. I'll give you an example. When Obama talked to Steve Jobs about shifting maybe some of the production of Apple iPhone back to United States, Steve Jobs just said, no, can't be done. Can you imagine if Xi Jinping went to talk to Jack Ma and says, "Hey, how about have more more localized production in China?" And Jack Ma just like, "No, no, not gonna do it." I mean, that just doesn't happen. This is a very easy example. And another example is infrastructure. Like China has built a high-speed rail and to every corner of the country, and they have very excellent 5G network now. Now you can go to hiking in the mountains, go to the Himalayan foothill. You have excellent coverage. I lived in Los Angeles for many years. There's many part of Los Angeles you still get dead zones, right? I mean, Los Angeles is only the second largest city in the United States. And this is the reason is because in US everything is profit driven. There's not enough return on capital to justify the investment in rural infrastructure, apparently, and to serve the people who live in the remote part of the country. And this is why you will see Wall Street Journal articles criticizing China's high-speed rail system. They're saying, "Oh, China is building all these trunk lines out to the middle of nowhere in Tibet, in the Gobi Desert, They're never going to get return on their investment. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding. The infrastructure is not a profit-making enterprise. It's to serve public goods. Actually, by serving public goods, you actually facilitated economic exchange. The whole reason of infrastructure is really the government that taking charge of public infrastructure precisely is because these things should not be turned into private enterprises to squeeze out every penny from consumers. And these are the very obvious differences between China and United States. A lot of people just didn't know where to look because maybe they're not familiar with China. They don't have the proper context to understand it. But in China, the difference is they still have those poverty alleviation trains where they maintain like a train line that goes to very remote mountainous area that allow the farmers there to take their local produce, including goats and sheep, to get on the train so they can reach the market, and they keep the fare unchanged for 30 years. So local people can also profit from the economy. That kind of thing would not exist in United States.
Yeah, I love every single example that you brought to the table. I mean, about Jack Ma, about healthcare in your childhood, especially in an era that was quite different to what it is now, right? In terms of China's economic stability. And then on top of that, my favorite is the high-speed rail. I mean, I travel through China through high-speed rail all the time. And like you said, I'm not just traveling to the other big cities. It's not just connecting the big urban center to another big urban economic center. It's like I can go to the most far out rural region, which is connected directly to Shanghai. I don't have to switch trains. I can just go straight there to a farm. I can go straight there to a rural region in China that I've always wanted to see. And not only does that connect me to these people, but it connects these people to other metropolitans and other farms and all these different areas. So rural populations are not marginalized and they're not isolated. Whereas as I spent time in the West, in Australia, in the US, rural populations are completely isolated. They're just like totally cut off from the societies in all these different cities. So that, for one, like you said, is a people-centered, public goods-driven facility. But I think the Wall Street Journal has no idea what that even means, what a people-centered public goods even could be, as it's being critiqued for not being profit-driven. Really, really love these examples that you brought up. Radhika, I'd like to hear about you. As someone who's traveled to China so much, how have you experienced socialism in action?
You guys use the example of a high-speed train. I don't particularly have experience of the Chinese healthcare system or anything, but thankfully, nor do I have the experience of the American healthcare system because I've lived in Canada a lot. And Canada has a publicly provided healthcare system, although it's being excoriated by neoliberal policies and so on. But yeah, I think infrastructure is definitely a key issue. I think the expansion of higher education in China that has taken place over the last couple of decades has been enormous. And I think it's bound to have a huge impact on China. So I would say that that's another thing. Yet another thing is that, in the process of, we talk about Chinese socialism. And I think one of the things about the party state in China is, it's not that the party state has always got everything right. But I think what's interesting about the party is that it learns. It has a mechanism of learning. And I think that between sort of coming here often and reading and so on, first of all, I think what's impressed me is that the sheer width of the political spectrum is much greater. In China, you have liberals duking it out with socialists and then policies, neoliberals versus socialists, and everybody has their say and then policy is decided. And I think that has actually been quite revealing to me. I think that often my Western colleagues are very curious about what I experience in China. And I say, actually, all sorts of things are said in China that you'd think, should not be said. But actually, in China, as I say, different options are considered and then given option may be chosen or a set of options may be chosen. So I think that whereas in the West, you can't be a socialist at all. So it's all like the political spectrum is this narrow, whereas in China, it's this wide. So that's another thing that I find really interesting. I think also that the new emphasis, I think that, so the reason I started talking about how the party learns is that I think in the process of reform and opening up and in the expansion of higher education, there was a time when I think that there was a brief period of time when in the education system, with which I have some experience, was as if, like they were swallowing neoclassical economics and Western style social science whole. You no longer need to talk about Marx, you only need to talk about Max Weber and Paul Samuelson and, neoclassical economics and so on. And this is now changing with a new emphasis on Marxism. And I think that's good. And I feel that what I'm also seeing here in China is that not only is Marx was mainly a critic of capitalism, but this critique is also being used to develop the theory of socialism. And I think that's been really interesting to me as well. And for the rest, I just want to say about, since we are talking so much about infrastructure, in Western countries, infrastructure has become a big boondoggle in many ways. So first of all, when infrastructure is to be built, essentially building infrastructure means that governments give guaranteed cost plus huge profit, very lucrative contracts to corporations. The accountability is very low, so they may be, not built on time. Like, there are so many scandalous instances of cost overruns that go into absolutely like 2 or 3 times the original cost and so on. So that way, big corporations simply milk the state for money. Whereas here, even though there are private corporations that may be building infrastructure, they are accountable. You promise to deliver this, you must deliver this, only then you get paid, etc. Secondly, privatization. The privatization of key natural monopolies, water provision, electricity provision, railways, etc., has meant that private capitalists have been minting money, making money out of things that people can't do without. So I was reading in a Financial Times column of all places that, this fabled American consumer no longer exists, because if you actually look at what the things, overwhelming majority of the money earned by an average American individual is spent on things you can't help spending money on. You've got to pay your rent or your mortgage. You've got to pay your utilities. You've got to pay back your loans. You've got to pay for your phone, etc. And once all of this is paid for, which is now increasingly paid to private corporations, there's nothing left over. So there we go. So in that sense, I think that the experience of China and people in China is very different.
Absolutely. I wanted to bring another story that I am quite personally attached to lately, and I don't know if either of you have heard about it. But recently there was some pretty terrible flooding in Rongjiang, which is in Guizhou province. Guizhou province historically has been one of the more poorer regions because it's really hard to build infrastructure there. There's mountains all abound. You have to drill tunnels and create all these highways. And it's so impressive to me that high-speed rails have been built there because there's so many natural obstacles that make it really difficult. So instead of just knocking down all the natural environment, which Guizhou is very famous for, they've managed to build around it and still maintain the naturist beauty of Guizhou, but also provide infrastructure. Recently, there was a flood, and Guizhou was pretty badly affected by it. There was a lot of soil erosion, and people's houses were affected. And something that has really, really moved me, I have a lot of friends out there who are villagers, who are a lot of really great women, actually, who are performers and who perpetuate and continue their vibrant cultures. And most of them are from ethnic minority groups. And the crisis problem solving that has happened on the ground has been like this. Within a day, within 48 hours, not only were the villagers mobilizing, but all the leaders, all the party members, but also China brought in rescue workers from other regions of China. China brought in military personnel to help out with the tougher jobs. China brought in doctors, healthcare professionals. And it was incredible to see this very fast mobilization to avert a crisis, right? And I saw tons and tons of videos of the people there crying because they were so moved by how rapid the response was. And I couldn't help but think about how in the US, the most recent time when military personnel was called was during the protests against ICE, where the military was called in to repress the protesters because ICE was going into parks and schools to grab people and deport them. It's just like, it blows my mind, the stark difference of the crisis response and what team or whose side the state is actually on. In China,
Absolutely.
it's so clear that the state is on the side of the people. And in America, it's quite the opposite. They're on the side of the capitalists or the 1%, the wealthy. So that story really moved me. And yeah, I want to kind of move to kind of a more like current trending topic, a new recent development, which is Trump's new tariffs on 14 different countries. A lot of them in the global south, Southeast Asia, Latin America, ranging from 25 to 40%. A lot of Chinese people have also been responding to this. And if it wasn't already clear, it's very clear, or it made abundantly clear, that America is doing its America First policy and just creating a lot of subordination to the global South nations, as it always has historically been doing. But Chinese businesses have also been affected by this because they engage in trade and cooperation with different global South countries such as Thailand and Mexico, which have been hit with these tariffs. So I wanted to ask for your just general opinions on what's been going on, how you've seen it play out. Carl, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I mean, this is Trump says about America first, but it's really about subjugation, economic subjugation of other countries. For example, when Indonesia sent its trade delegate to negotiate the trade deal with United States in Washington, one of the things that Washington raised is that the QR code payment, the mobile payment in Indonesia, they say that was biased toward Indonesian local vendors, and it create unfair playing field for American companies like MasterCard and Visa. Now, what does this have to do with manufacturing United States? It has nothing. It's everything about economic, financial domination of the US over global South countries. I mean, the QR code mobile payment system, I have used it in China, in Thailand, in Indonesia. They're very convenient. Now, even like street vendors, allow you to scan a QR code and using mobile payment. This is great. I mean, for people who use it here, it's great. But yet, U.S. is complaining about that because that's not. They consider that taking business away from U.S. credit card company. And which isn't every government's responsibility is to make sure their local business prosper. I mean that's what those QR payment system is designed to do. But Trump administration is like, no, no, no. Are you forgetting somebody? Are you forgetting about the Wall Street? And this is why there has been a lot of pushback. I mean, China was the first to push back against the Trump tariff. I think that actually showed the other countries that they can also say no to Trump. This recently happened during the BRICS meeting when Brazilian President Lula said we need to move into a new trade currency because if we don't do that, we will end the 21st century the same way we started 20th century. Of course, two world wars started in the early 20th century. I mean, he didn't even explicitly name the US dollar as a culprit. And Trump was so offended, he said he's going to slap 10% tariff against all BRICS member nations, calling the BRICS an anti-American alliance. And to that, Lula said, well, you can't talk to us like that. I mean, as a leader of a big country, it's completely ridiculous for you to talk to people, to make threats over the internet. And we are sovereign countries. We don't need another emperor. And if you're going to slap tariff against us, we're going to impose tariff back. And then Trump, went ballistic. Now he's going to slap 50% tariff on Brazil if they didn't release Bolsonaro. I mean, like, whatever to happen to Bolsonaro, that's an internal affair of Brazil. But that's the logic of the empire. They feel like that's, they're in everyone's business. I don't think this is going to work because, for one thing, the Trump tariff had been fundamentally destabilizing, even for the U.S. economy. They think tariff is this magical bullet that will fix all the problem that brought on by neoliberalism for the last 4 decades. The hollowing out of the manufacturing base, et cetera, et cetera. But the, but the problem is, what happened when you have no manufacturing? The tariff is supposed to help if you have some manufacturing, if you have manufacturing to help. But what happened when you have no manufacturing? If you had to build everything up, you actually need to go to China to get the machine parts. I mean, that's the case with the rare earth issue. After China slapped the rare earth export control, a lot of the people say, "Oh, no problem. We'll just dig the rare earth in United States. We have plenty. We just mine, baby, mine, drill, baby, drill." But the problem is not as simple as digging out from some mine, which will take 3 to 4 years to open a new mine, by the way. But the problem lies in processing. It's because they have moved the whole rare earth industry to China since 1980s. Not only the mining operation was moved, but China also made a conscious decision they're going to climb the tech tree. So they work on the refining industry. And at the time, the Wall Street decided, refining rare earth is such a low margin business anyway. Let Chinese have it. We'll go over there, help them. But now it's been 40 years. There have been 2 generations of new technology that has evolved to make use of the rare earth, to refine the rare earth into heat-resistant magnet that goes into cars, go to missiles, F-35, etc. All that machine tools, all that technology is now Chinese. So now even if United States, they dig out rare earth from their mines, they still ship it to China for processing, right? And when they come back, they're going to slap with 50% tariff thanks to Trump. And this is the whole problem with the Trump tariff, because it's like the example I'd like to use. It's like a 80-year-old grandpa who say, "Oh, back 50 years ago, I was a world record holder of powerlifting," right? But except he hasn't been trained in the last 40 years. He let himself, he let himself go, and now he say, "Oh yeah, let me show you. I can still break the current world record," right? If that happened in real life, you will say, "Oh, whoa, grandpa, please go easy." But that's exactly what Trump's plan is doing. It's trying to go cold turkey, and it's not going to work. And this is why they have to go back to China to work out a deal in Geneva and then in London. And so all these tariff talk. This is Trump. He will probably change his policy in 90 days anyway. Not even 90 days, few weeks. Taco Tuesday. We can always count on Taco Tuesday.
Carl, you really have a really amazing way of turning all of this like real ongoing stuff into something very humorous and easy to understand. I so appreciate that. Radhika, what about you? Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly, I was going to bring up this whole, why is this new expression taco, why does Trump hate it so much? Taco stands for Trump always chickens out, because as we've seen, since Liberation Day, which was like the 2nd of April, and I think he made it the 2nd of April because he thought that if he did it on the 1st of April, everybody would figure out exactly what it was, which is it was an April Fool's trick. So he put it on the 2nd of April, but it's still an April Fool's trick in the sense that he has kept threatening tariffs, but he has actually not been, of course, China is facing a few, and some other countries have, Canada is, and so on. But on the whole, he hasn't been able to impose very many, simply because his corporate friends and CEOs are going to be very upset. So, as I said, all of these tariff shenanigans, this great tariff show, has really been about trying to pretend to American voters that he's doing something about their misery. Well, first of all, as we've seen, it was never true that tariffs were going to address their misery. The only thing that can address the misery of Americans is a complete turnaround on neoliberal policies, which Trump is not capable of doing. In fact, Trump is committed to the opposite. He's committed to even more neoliberal policies than the Biden administration in many ways. So there you have it. Another thing one should add is that tariffs on their own, tariffs have historically, yes, played an important role in the industrialization of every country. whether it's the United States itself or the UK or Europe or what have you, everybody has employed tariffs because tariffs are necessary. Because when your industries are young, if you expose them to the winds of international competition, then they will essentially die. So you have to protect them for a while. So it's called infant industry protection, for example. So tariffs have always had a role to play, but they have never been effective on their own. Alongside tariffs, you need a clear industrial strategy. The United States and the Trump administration have not done industrial strategy probably since the early 20th century. That must have been the latest point in time. So they don't know industrial strategy, and industrial strategy requires, again, that the state should be able to tell corporations what to do.
Right.
This is not possible in the United States. In the United States, the corporations tell the state what to do. So in that sense, I would say that Trump is, again, this is all a show. And I also agree with Carl that the effect of all of this, Trump is not really applying all the worst tariffs that he had threatened. He's still chickening out. He keeps postponing them. Now they've been postponed to August. And God knows some people are even naming September. So we'll see whether anything happens. But the atmosphere of uncertainty that has been created, that is going to affect the Americans. I think people will eventually say, we don't need to trade with the Americans. If you can't, what economic relations ultimately require predictability. If you don't have a reliable, predictable trading partner, then you'll find somebody else, because you can't put up with these tantrums, these shenanigans, these drama queen, behavior for very long. So this is going to have its effect. And I'll add one other interesting statistic, because, of course, when Trump came out with his tariffs, actually, I spent that entire month doing shows on Trump's tariffs and writing pieces on, what it really means and so on. And, as a student of developmental policy, as I say, I know you can't have just tariffs, you have to have industrial policy as well. But another thing that's really interesting is Trump essentially rolled out these tariffs. You remember that great sort of White House launch show, with his big placard and whatnot. He was acting as though the world is going to shake in its socks the moment it hears the word American tariffs, because the whole world relies on selling to the United States. But that is in fact not true anymore. Over the last decade or so, the United States share of total world imports has declined quite radically, so that today, depending on how you count it, it is somewhere between about 10% of world imports and 15% or 16% of world imports. It's not small, but it's not huge. Plus, if beyond Canada, Mexico, and of course China, the rest of the world does not rely on the US that much. China has also radically reduced in recent years its reliance, plus it's a vast economy, so that it is better able to absorb any shock. Supposing all trade with the United States cease, it will be better able to absorb the shock. So for all of these reasons, the real effect of these tariffs is going to be that the United States is going to become sidelined in world trade.
Ooh, I love that.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I love also the word shenanigans, because that's exactly
what they
this
are.
is. Yes.
Yeah.
And I also...
Oh, and
yes,
if I may just add one other
course.
point, because we started with America first, and you mentioned this expression, it's not America first. It's actually, first of all, if Trump puts anything first, of course, it is his own political interest, but then close second will come the interests of big American corporations. That's not America. That's not the ordinary people of America. In fact, the interests of these corporations and that of ordinary working people in the United States are opposed. You mentioned the ICE raids. You mentioned the fact that, you have had in recent years loads of storms and other such calamities hit American cities, and people are there months later, years later, without any help. Okay. Recently, I think there was some big disaster and people were getting like, I don't know, $50-$60 for what? Like, this is not compensation.
Yeah.
It's not going to help them in any way. So, and the capitalist character of the United States is shown not even, you don't even have to go as far as the ICE raids. In ordinary cities, the rich people's neighborhoods are properly policed, defended. Meanwhile, in the poor neighborhoods, not only is there enormous amounts of violence, drugs, everything that makes life hell for ordinary people, but on top of that, ordinary people in those communities are themselves criminalized.
Yes.
So effectively, there is an ongoing war on working people, Black people, Hispanic people, and minorities of all sorts. And this is an everyday experience in the United States.
Absolutely. I can vouch for that because I did spend a lot of time there. And like you said, this America First policy, it doesn't actually benefit the American people at all,
No.
but just the American corporations.
And sorry, another quick point. In the United States, prisons are run for profit.
Right.
Which means that the justice system actually feeds, presumably there's some implicit contract where the justice system is feeding the prisons, because without prisoners, you don't have prisons. You charge per prisoner how many prisoners you are taking care of. So the justice system is filling up the prisons, with the result that the United States is among the first, at the top of the charts in terms of the proportion of its population that it imprisons.
Absolutely. And they enable slavery within those prisons,
Indeed,
right?
they do.
So,
yes.
And then they point the finger at China.
At China.
Right. So this brings me to my last point, and we're going to wrap up pretty soon, even though I could talk to you both all day. But, China's response during Trump's tariff war has been really eye-opening, and I think it has won a lot of public opinion over China. I know we've spoken a lot about America today, but I also wanted to ask the both of you, how has public opinion changed, not only for Americans, which I have myself seen is evident, but also in global South countries, for example, the ones that you're both in or from, in India, in Indonesia, or in other places. Clearly, the Trump tariff shenanigans have backfired significantly. Public opinion is shifting. And I wanted to maybe conclude this conversation by asking you, how has the public opinion about China shifted where you're from and where you are?
I would say that it is interesting. I think China's economic success, there's this old expression, nothing succeeds like success. So China's economic success has certainly won a lot of friends. I think that in that sense, I think that people in the rest of the world are beginning to see, particularly in what we may call the world majority countries, that is to say the non-Western world, I think they're increasingly able to see that, the West is declining, China is rising. So that's very clear. China's foreign policy, again, is also winning friends, its foreign policy of investing in other countries and so on. So in all of these ways, I would say that China's reputation is rising. Meanwhile, with, disasters like Trump being elected, and Trump is not alone, you had Boris Johnson in the UK, Liz Truss, of all people. Like when such politicians get elected, you can see, essentially you have to ask yourself, how many things have to go wrong before such absolute prize idiots can get elected as the leaders of your country. So I would say that all of this is sinking in, and people are realizing, and I should say, coming from India, which you have these Pew surveys, India had typically registers as among the most pro-American of all the third world countries. And I would say that even in India, things are shifting today. So things are looking, and they have to shift. How can you respect a country, which elects such leaders, basically?
Yeah.
And Biden wasn't much better.
No.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, very, very good to hear. I really like to hear that. Carl, what about you? Any closing remarks and, response to that?
Yeah, I agree with Radhika there. Trump policy have made China clearly the responsible global leader. Now it's obvious to everyone. I'm just sitting here in Bali enjoying watching the decline of the American empire and laughing all the way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for being with me here today. I learned so much from the both of you, and I hope we can continue to be in conversation and in touch. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of Roughly Chinese. Please comment, subscribe, and like this video, and let us know your thoughts, and please follow us for more episodes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.